All right, folks, we are 2 minutes after, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, friends and colleagues. Welcome to the Tourism Skillshop, hosted by State of Washington Tourism, SWT. My name is Matthew Ozuna, and I am the Destination Development Manager at SWT. I will introduce today's webinar on film-friendly destinations with Washington Filmworks. Please utilize the chat, say hello, let us know where you're zooming in from today. Feel free to share your comments in the chat box at any time during the presentation, and utilize the Q&A feature as well. Mike Moe is also on the webinar with us today. He is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Tourism Development at SWT. Mike will monitor the chat and help address questions from the audience near the end of the webinar. Now, if some of you are new to the Tourism Skillshop, let me give you some background information on it. The Tourism Skillshop is one of many industry educational programs from State of Washington Tourism. This webinar series will engage with colleagues across the tourism sector and broaden their industry knowledge, skills, and network. Each webinar will highlight a specific issue or skill for tourism professionals to ponder and discuss with industry experts. State of Washington Tourism will host live webinars of the Tourism Skillshop on the third or fourth Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. These webinars are free and open to all tourism stakeholders. The webinars will also be recorded and shared with registrants, as well as other users on the SWT YouTube channel. For Tourism Skillshop and other industry updates, visit the SWT industry website, sign up for the Industry Update newsletter, and follow SWT on LinkedIn. Tourism stakeholders may also join the SWT Facebook group for further discussion on topics related to the Tourism Skillshop and other industry news, issues, and events. Now, let's dive in today's webinar. The Tourism Skillshop for September will help communities become film-friendly. This webinar will take attendees behind the scenes for a closer look at film and television production in the state of Washington and examine the impacts on tourism and economic development. Learn how to attract media industry professionals with incentives, location scouting, and other resources through Washington Filmworks. Become a film liaison and provide local expertise and production support for projects that can boost the local economy and elevate a destination's profile. The film industry can even bring your stakeholders together and foster community pride and engagement. I'm thinking of iconic landmarks, cultural traditions, and extras in films. In case you didn't know, Washington Filmworks has been at the center of facilitating and funding film production across the state for the last 16 years. It is a private 501c6 nonprofit organization that manages the Motion Picture Competitiveness Program and other resources for the creative industries in the state of Washington. The mission of Washington Filmworks is to create economic development opportunities by building and enhancing the competitiveness, profile, and sustainability of Washington State's film industry. This includes, and I think it's very important to point out, additional incentives for projects filming in rural jurisdictions and for films that tell stories of marginalized communities, a workforce development mandate for people from underrepresented communities, and support for small budget productions creatively driven by Washington residents. It's important to point out that Washington Filmworks, has financially supported 131 projects and generated $418 million of economic impact across our state. With increased funding for program enhancement and incentives, like the ones I just mentioned, Washington Filmworks is focusing its promotional efforts on rural parts of the state, expanding the Film Liaison Network, and improving ways to support jurisdictions with film and television production. Now, I'd like to introduce today's panel. This webinar will feature industry experts with extensive backgrounds in film production and promotion. They are Amy Lillard, Executive Director of Washington Filmworks, Dave Drummond, Location Manager and Scout at Drummond Media, and Laura Hilton, Film Liaison for Island County and Special Projects for Embrace, Whidbey, and Camino Islands. Panelists, welcome to the Tourism Skillshop, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Nice to see you.
Okay. Amy, I know you have plenty to share with us today, so how about you go first?
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen. Matthew, that was a lovely introduction. I have to say you've done your homework and we appreciate it. And I can skip over some of my things. And then also, I just want to say hello. I see a lot of our film liaisons saying hi in the chat. So it's always good to see those folks as well. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. All right, can you see that? Oh, wait, I need to go view. Oops, place from start. How's that? Are you seeing it? Full screen?
We're still seeing
Slideshow?
we're not seeing the full screen yet. Oh, there it goes. Now you're ready.
Now I'm ready. We'll start there. All right. So again, thank you, Matthew, for the kind introduction. My name is Amy Lillard. I'm the Executive Director of Washington Filmworks. And as Matthew suggested, we are a legislatively commissioned nonprofit organization. I know we've been doing this for 16 years because I was pregnant with my son when I first got this job. So now every time he has a birthday, I regrettably know that I am 1 year older, but here for my 16th year. We are very fortunate at Washington Filmworks because we got a very big increase in funding in our program in the 2022 legislative session. We used to just focus on funding projects, but now we have the ability to really support the entire ecosystem of film. I know tourism is always fighting for those dollars, and just so you know, we're always signing in support of your legislation too, and we'll continue to do that and be at the table with you for sure. And I am here today largely to talk about how you can be a film-friendly jurisdiction. And my job today is really about table setting and giving you some context and some grounding about the film industry in Washington State. You know, I think when you're talking about the film industry, you're often thinking about the city of Seattle, which is the largest production center in the state, and also Spokane, where you see a bunch of work as well. But you would be very surprised that many projects come through our world, which are not only in those two production centers, but all over the state. I mean, I don't know who, like HGTV loves Washington State, probably because of the gorgeous locations that we have, but they're here all the time. We just finished a gigantic photo shoot for a catalog. What we talk about at Washington Filmworks is if you have a camera in your hand, we'll help you find what you need in Washington State to get your work done. People ask me all the time, like, oh, you love your job, right? It's so sexy. It's so fun. And yes, it is totally fun. You know, people like to associate the film industry with famous people and iconic stories. What really gets us going at Washington Filmworks and has really kept me motivated for all these years is the jobs for our local folks and the economic impact it has. And I think that there are a couple of jurisdictions that have just done a fantastic job of really weaving the films that have come through the place where they live as part of the storytelling of where they live and how it weaves into the culture of the community. I'm going to give you a couple of really specific examples of that as we move through this conversation. So all things being said, the folks who are here today that Matthew assembled were really about having you walk away with the idea that you are not alone. There's so many people who can help if you're interested in pursuing film, and we are here to support however that looks in your community. So just quickly on this slide, you're going to see a very high level overview of the work at Washington Filmworks. You know, film has a long history in Washington State, all the way back to things like it happened at the World's Fair, or everyone likes to talk about singles or Northern Exposure. In the late 90s, we say that in the late 90s, Washington State started looking a lot like Vancouver, BC, and that is because of these incentives. These incentives, these production incentives, which is these funding programs that we run, are they're the best tool in our toolbox to land the larger budget productions, those things that become iconic films from a region. Incentives in general are a return on what you spend in state. So as you come into Washington and hire local workers and work with local businesses, we'll give you money back for those investments. So we currently run 2 funding programs, the Production Incentive Program, which brings that bigger budget stuff. We see a lot of features and episodic series within that funding program. And then we just launched this small budget production initiative, which I'm really excited about. It's a program that is supporting the emerging Washington State filmmaker. We take great pride in the fact that we help launch the careers of, now famous directors like, Megan Griffiths, for example, the late, great Lynn Shelton, and some of our producers. And this particular program is really about investing in our local folks. All right. The other side of the equation is the film office. And this is where a lot of our film liaisons from across the state interface with us. We have all the resources that you need to film in Washington. So we have a production directory, which lists all the crew. We have this fabulous location database, which I'm going to talk about at the very end, which is how you market your jurisdiction internationally. We have permit information, and again, this very powerful network of film liaisons, which I know that Laura's going to jump into because she's our official film liaison out on Island County. So with that, let's move on. So I really like to talk about the economic impact because it's really interesting. This is our famous zombie apocalypse project. We, again, Matthew said we've financially supported 131 projects that have spent a lot of money in this state and created over 26,000 jobs for local folks. But I like to bring this as an example of the economic impact, an example of an economic impact study that we did that could relate to your potential jurisdiction. So this particular show obviously was about zombies, and it filmed for 5 years in Spokane, but you'll notice that first statistic there, they filmed in 24 cities all across Washington State. And I know that tourism folks really like to cite data about the hotel stays in your region. And over those 5 years, they had 3,395 room nights. And so, of course, that was over 5 years, but that's over 600 room nights each season. And again, a season is 4 months, so it takes about 4 months to get through one season of an episodic. So the other thing that I really like to cite on this particular slide is the fact that every single week they would be writing a check. Am I allowed to say, does anyone write checks anymore, really? But, spending money with between 125 and 150 unique businesses in communities across the state. So again, it is about film. It is about, jobs for our local cast and crew, but this has impact all across the economy. I'll also mention that for whatever reason, Z Nation had all of these fan clubs all over the state or all over the world. We had fan clubs in Australia, India, UK, Japan, and South Africa as examples. And so you're thinking about, Spokane and these 24 cities across the state, which were places like Port Angeles, Walla Walla, Pasco. These are some examples of those 24 cities. So literally, Z Nation and these locations are being broadcast across the globe. All right, moving on. So Dave Drummond is a location manager, and he's going to share more about what he does. But, one of the things that we like to share out with our community is that people got to eat and people got to sleep. These are just two really good examples of where we spend money as the film industry going into communities. What's interesting about the data, because when we fund something, we literally get every receipt and every payroll report and have to audit that. So we know our data is super solid. 50% of any budget goes to paying people, and the other 50% is for Washington businesses. But only 5.4% of those businesses are film businesses. For everything else: lumber, office supplies, thrift shopping for costumes, hotels, car rentals, feeding people, putting people up. So, when you attract a production to your community, it's not just about the production, it's about, spreading the money in the place that you live. Cool. So the other thing, Mike from the state of Washington gave me this wonderful new thing. I'm putting my notes up here. So all these years on the Zoom, and I'm just learning to do this now. All right. So I wanted to chat a little bit about, some jurisdictions across Washington state that are just doing a fantastic job of using film as a catalyst for tourism. I'm not even going to mention Sleepless in Seattle. Like, we all know that. That's a great story. It's 25 years old. Let's find some more, right? I want the next Sleepless in Seattle. That's my goal as the film commissioner. So I'll use Z Nation, since I just showed you that beautiful photo of all those zombies. But if you go to Spokane, they have a walking tour of locations where the project filmed. They did this fantastic partnership with the MAC, which is the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, where they invited the production to film in the actual museum, and then did an exhibit simultaneously. So people could walk through and see what was happening, and then also experience things like props and costumes and things like that in the exhibit. So that was a good one. The other thing, of course, good old Twilight. We all love, I did love the Twilight, I'm not gonna lie. So out in Forks, Washington, which I think we all know is the rainiest town in the contiguous United States, which, like, they're using film to market all the rain that they have. So they do, not only do they have a collection of props and costumes from the actual production, but they also have this photo op with, quote, Bella's trucks. You can also print a map for a self-guided tour around Forks, talking about, where all of the places are that Bella hung out. And then again, the annual Forever Twilight and Forks Festival. So this happens every year. And this is my favorite part. My favorite part is they never filmed there, ever. No filming, just the book. So if your jurisdiction is being used in a movie as inspiration, you can still capitalize on film in your community with that in mind, with Twilight in mind. Then there's the good old Northern Exposure, which filmed here in the late 90s, and they have Moose Fest every year, where they bill it as just hanging out together. They might have dinner, they might watch episodes, but this is like such an easy thing for the community, because literally what they do is they tell you where they're going to put up the flyer. They put it on the bulletin board in the post office, and then you call a phone number and you just meet up with this group. So, what you're looking at is the whole spectrum of like investments by a community to propel that tourism front forward. And it can be as elaborate as the Museum of Arts and Culture, or as easy as a flyer on the post office bulletin board. So Matthew was kind enough to mention our enhanced incentive. Enhanced incentives are additional dollars if you do one of two things. The one I'm going to talk about now is the rural enhanced incentive. For those of you that are in rural Washington, that's 30 out of 39 counties. So if you film in one of those jurisdictions, you can get an additional 10% back on what you spend in state. What I love about this is we put into the guidelines and criteria for qualification that if you qualify for that, you have to do a piece of marketing for the jurisdiction. So it's already built in. And so Washington Filmworks will work with the jurisdiction and help you decide what would be best to market the jurisdiction in partnership with the production, and we'll make it work. That could be a newspaper coming to set. That could be some behind the scenes photos. It could be some behind the scenes videos because we're the film industry, but we work with the jurisdiction to figure out what works for them. We've had a couple of commercials come through and benefit from this, and it's been incredible. These videos that we're getting are like love letters to locations across Washington state. We all know we have spectacular locations, but we have clients on video saying like, there's no better place to film than Washington state. So again, if you're thinking about getting engaged, that's just, one of those perks that we can offer to help you market your jurisdiction. All right, moving on. So I would be remiss before handing it off to not give you a couple of things that you can do right now to get started, right? And again, our goal today, I have the great pleasure of being the person who does a lot of talking for Washington Filmworks, but we have Vicki Berglund Davenport in the film office. We have Sherry Wyatt, which many of you tourism folks know, doing some rural economic development for us. And we're all here to help you on this journey of film. And so add locations in our database. You can literally upload your own photos in our location database. And what happens is when people are looking, this is an internationally searchable photo database for film. And we have everyone from independent filmmakers to Warner Brothers or Netflix or HGTV, which is how they found one of our jurisdictions, looking through this database for the perfect location for their project. It's totally free. You can upload your own photos. And then in addition, when we get specific requests, I'm looking for a waterfall where I can drive a car up to, because Washington State does a lot of commercials for car commercials, which Dave Drummond can talk about. But this database is an incredible resource that markets your jurisdiction for free. And so if we get those calls, we'll search the database, share those photos with our clients or potential clients. And then that's one of the ways that you can immediately make your jurisdiction marketable. Review your local permitting. I'm going to just say, film is disruptive. You got a lot going on. You got a bunch of people coming in, they're staying in your hotels, they're eating, they're, closing some streets down. I'm going to let Dave talk about that. But one of the things that you can do to get ready is think about a film permit. There's a lot of resources that we can point you to, including, the city of Seattle that has been very helpful to other jurisdictions because they're so busy with film. They've helped different jurisdictions design their permitting process, but I know Dave's going to talk about that as well. 3, create a culture that celebrates film. I mean, I think, who doesn't have a favorite film, right? Like, I think everyone has a favorite film. And so, you can obviously share things that were filmed in your jurisdiction, but also film is something that people can rally around, right? As people come out of COVID and people, come back into community, it is really something that people get excited about and brings people together. So, and then finally, communicate with us. We are absolutely 100% here to help. And I totally forgot the trailer, didn't I? We went right through it.
I wasn't sure, Amy, if that was going to be your number 2 or you wanted to save it for the very end as a good transition today, or we can save it for the end of the webinar. What say you?
Well, I say we should, since I just gave everything I had to say, why don't we show the trailer, and then this, it'll give you an example of the projects that have come through Washington State and literally from all over, all over. That's funny.
Action.
There you go.
Great video, Amy. I love that. I've seen that a few times and I'm mesmerized by it each time. You brought up some good points. I just wanted to echo some of the points that you mentioned. Yeah, I've seen a few episodes of House Hunters in Washington State. I remember being surprised how many times Washington State homes are featured in that show. And I'm thinking not just, Sleepless in Seattle or the film that was shot in the 90s on Whidbey and Camino Islands. What was that? Practical Magic?
Magic, a favorite.
Yeah, those films. But even recent films like summer blockbusters. I'm thinking of Top Gun, the remake. And
Yes.
I spent a lot of time in San Diego, and I was actually in San Diego with my parents. We went to the Top Gun barbecue joint, and we were just outside the Coronado Air Base. And at the end of the film, we see the credits, and it said it was shot, parts of it were shot in Washington State. And I was just flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. I mean, so little things like that are just amazing. And then I'm a kid of the 90s. I remember Bill Nye the Science Guy filming all over Seattle. That made me, feel cool and a sense of pride to know that show was shown across the United States. So I mean, there's been these great examples of film and television in Washington State.
I mean, if you're looking for a suggestion or two, I mean, they're all like babies, right? I love them all. However, if you're looking for a love letter to Washington State, there's a movie called Captain Fantastic that stars Viggo Mortensen. And it is a gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful movie that kind of shows off all the locations. And then
Wow.
more, but I'll let, if there's time at the end, I mean, share more for sure.
Sure. No problem. Okay, well, thank you very much, Amy. That was delightful. Dave, let's turn to you next. So Dave,
Hi, everybody.
tell us a little bit more about your background and what you do as a location scout.
Sure. I work as a location scout and a location manager here in Washington State. I've been doing that for about 18 years. The essence of the job as a location scout, I'm hired by different production companies, whether that's TV shows or movies or TV commercials or any, as Amy mentioned, sort of anyone that has a camera and wants to shoot something here in the state. They'll hire me or a person like me to help them find their locations. So I'm given the script and the sort of the data on what they're wanting to accomplish. I then go out and find options for them and go scout those locations, take photographs, interface with the communities, with the film liaisons and location owners to help help different projects identify where they want to go. And then once they identify those places, help them actually do it, work through the logistics and all of the mechanics that are associated with bringing a film production or any production into a community.
Okay, so once a film crew decides to come to a specific community in Washington State, what does the town or other tourism stakeholders, what can they expect from this influx of people, material, cash?
Sure. So I mean, there's sort of those two phases. The early parts of scouting is essentially when we're exploring, and so during that part of the process, I'm reaching out to people and talking, trying to figure out where we can go and where things can work for a given production. Once it actually happens, or once we're agreeing that we're moving forward, a big part of my job is helping communities deal with the disruption, as Amy mentioned. So a movie, for example, to talk sort of on the larger scale, a movie or a TV show or a large television commercial may have 100 people or more that are associated with it that are coming, semi trucks full of equipment, all sorts of just sort of people and stuff that comes with us. And so navigating that, we might be shooting just at a barn or a picturesque barn somewhere. This is the actual thing that we're putting on camera, but our actual impact extends well beyond that as we're all around there and on the road outside of it and at the neighbor's farm and doing all these different things that are involved with the actual filming process. And so navigating that is a large part of what I do. And that's also something we want to, as we sort of educate different liaisons and different folks around the state to understand sort of what you're saying yes to if you're welcoming film in it. It's awesome, and we love to do it, but we want everyone to also understand just sort of what it involves, so you're ready for it when it happens.
Yeah, well, can you give us an example or a story of where this worked out terrifically, and maybe an example of where things could be improved?
Sure. I mean, so I worked on the recent third season of Twin Peaks, which is another one of the iconic shows, as Amy was mentioned, that sort of goes back 25 years and is deeply associated with the towns of North Bend and Snoqualmie. When we recently, a few years ago, that they shot a third season, so it was involved going back into those towns, going back to those areas, which was a fantastic experience. But there also was a lot of work to do to film at the diner for Twin Peaks, which is the Double R Diner, which is one of the iconic locations in the show, right there in sort of downtown North Bend. But in order to do that, it also involved, we had to divert traffic from the state highway that moved around it. There was a lot of things that were involved in the process of doing that filming. And so navigating that process was a big part of the discussion with both of those towns.
Excellent. Well, then, what other advice? What does a community need to possess in order to become a top-notch filming location? Maybe you can give us some expertise on that.
Sure. It starts with having a film liaison that is someone that we know who to call, and that whoever that is in the tourism office or wherever it sort of is logical for that person to be. It's great to have that as the first contact. If we're thinking about filming in a town, I want to be able to call and start and talk to someone about the feasibility and get an initial list of ideas and sort of work through all that sort of stuff. That's really great. The The other thing is when it comes to permitting. So a lot of, especially smaller communities that aren't used to don't have a lot of film, they may not have a film permit specifically. It's great if you do. And as Amy mentioned, I strongly recommend to communities to sort of work out what that might look like before a film comes. It's really helpful when you do that. We'll often get sort of lumped in with special events. It's because it's similar in many ways to when maybe you're planning the 4th of July parade or something like that, where there's it's something that involves a lot of coordination with businesses and everyone and closing down a street or diverting traffic. Those sort of things might be very similar. That's a good place to start. But for the time frame for filmmaking is usually so compressed that we really look to sort of bust through the permitting process in terms of the length of time it takes. If for that 4th of July parade, the permit needs to be submitted and everyone is talking about it months in advance of the 4th of July. That's not how filming works. We need to be able to communicate with everyone within the context of a few weeks or a few days to figure out what's possible, get all the appropriate permissions, and we want to do everything right. We just need to do it much faster than many communities are accompanied or accustomed to. And so finding ways to do that, or having a community that's prepared for those discussions, so that we're, like essentially when someone says that we'd love to have you here, submit your permit, we need to wait 2 months until the town council can review it, or these sort of things, that sort of stuff. I'll start looking at another town because we just know it won't work in terms of the time frame. So that's the main thing I would sort of advise, is trying to figure that out in advance. And we're happy to help you figure that out and what that might look like.
We have a relevant question, so I thought I'd just pop on. Megan asks, do you ever work with the DMOs, the destination marketing organizations, in certain locations when you're looking for a spot? They're the ones who are actually marketing a location. They often have a lot of B-roll, and they know, they're the location better than anybody. Do you work with those folks?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it varies from community to community, but essentially often those people are the same people we really want to be our sort of liaison and primary contact. Recently did a bunch of scouting, or go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, just as a follow up, if there's some DMOs on this line, if they don't feel like they've had that connection, how do they connect with you or the film office to make sure that they're kind of one of the first contacts for their location?
Yep. So the contacting the film office directly, the film manager is Vicki Davenport at Washington Filmworks, and Amy can comment a little bit about that too. But her part of her job is to identify those people and make those connections and maintain those connections. So she's the great person to connect with. When I'm wondering, then, if I'm headed to somewhere or want to explore whatever region or whatever town, my first call is usually to Vicki to ask her, who do you know out there? Who should I call? And that's the starting point for making those connections.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Megan. And thanks, Dave. We're right at time, so we'll move on to Laura now.
Sounds good.
Hey there, Laura. So we've heard from Dave, we've heard from Amy. Why don't we hear from you? Tell us more about your background and how you're connected with Washington Filmworks and what you do as a film liaison.
Yeah, so I do work for the local DMO. I'm a contractor for Embrace, Whidbey and Camino Islands. And there's a lot of crossover that goes between what filmmakers need and what visitors to a new destination need. So often that is a good place to draw your liaison from. We're up to date on what kind of lodging is available in the area, what's happening with restaurants post-COVID, who can manage the catering, those kinds of local details. So the film liaison is kind of the connection between the filmmaker, the film office, and the community. So sometimes, in Dave's case, he's been scouting and location managing in Washington forever, really knows the area well. And it might be just a case of, do you know who owns whatever? Can you put me in touch with, but sometimes it's somebody from out of state completely who has, not a lot of local knowledge. Particularly in our case, they sometimes see island and think, do you even have a grocery store? Like, what can we expect out there? So we kind of let the filmmaker know what to expect on the ground in a destination, but also try and pave the way to make it a smooth process for the community. It can be disruptive, but it's also really exciting and just a fun thing that most people enjoy being around, as long as we can smooth the road before they get there and help with making sure communities know what to expect. Ideally are prepared with a film permit or some kind of process for how to deal with these requests and get excited for what it could look like and what to expect, but letting people know that it's coming and that this is an exciting thing to be a part of.
No, I think that's a exciting thing to be a part of. Economic benefit, community pride, and engagement. I'm for all of those things, and those things have happened on Whidbey and Camino Island. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about a specific filming project in your neck of the woods?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, we're celebrating 25 years. This year is the anniversary of Practical Magic. So you've seen the kinds of effects that can come from, an unexpected sleeper hit that just keeps bringing people back for years to come. And there is something about, Coopville is such a beautiful location. Anyone who's been there would fall in love with it. But there is something different about having first experienced a place through a movie. You already kind of have that love and pride of place before you arrive at it. So there is kind of a sort of a fondness and respect for a place before you even get to it. But it doesn't have to be a large scale thing like that either. A couple of years ago, we had a really wonderful independent film that came and ended up shooting almost the whole movie on Whidbey, and they were just really engaged with the community, really lovely to work with, very open to suggestions for new locations that weren't originally even in the script, but kind of fit with the story and really looked great on screen. And they just were so nice about really engaging with any of the locations they went into, any of the places they ate or stayed at. You could see all the crew wearing their Blue Fox Drive-In t-shirts and Cozy's Roadhouse hats, and they're, they really enjoyed their time here and were very enthusiastic about not only coming back and shooting another project here in the future because they'd had such a good experience, but, here's a whole crew full of people who have never been here before, who are now coming back on vacations with their family or, looking to buy a house. It introduces communities to an audience, but also to the crew of people who may not have experienced it before.
Excellent. Well, can you tell us, so we have a few destinations or communities on the webinar today that want to learn from you, and looks like there's been some positive impact, but have you learned from any negative impacts or examples where things didn't go as planned? What did you learn from those, whether it was community engagement or getting your permits in on time? What have you learned from your mistakes, essentially?
Yeah, letting people know is always a big one. That most people got really excited and amped about film, but you're always going to have a few grumps. So it's nice when you can let a community know what's coming. That's, sometimes when a scout comes into a location, they don't want to spread the word yet because it might not happen. We don't want to get people's hopes up and when they're still looking at other places, or it might be for an advertisement where the product hasn't been seen by the public yet, or there might be a big star involved. So sometimes a certain amount of privacy is required. And so it's good as the person on the ground to be able to, it's different with each production. And so you'll probably know, okay, this community is going to be really laid back about this. These are the people I should talk to. But this community, in the past, we've had this come up, or we need to make sure that this business owner knows, you start to know the personalities. But that's the great thing about Washington Filmworks leading this great communication network and drawing in liaisons from different areas and making it a really close network of communication with people like Dave. Because you did hear horror stories in the past. I'm happy to say we haven't had anything too serious beyond like, oh, you know, so-and-so was a little grumpy about that. We'll make sure next time to go somewhere else or let this person know. It hasn't been anything major, but we did have a story back in the 80s in Langley of a movie that came to town and, you know, painted all the shop fronts and made modifications and then kind of ran out of money and, you know, skipped town in the night kind of thing. And those are the stories that stick with people for a long time. That's exactly what you don't want to see happen in your community. And that's exactly why leaning on Washington Filmworks for support, leaning on your liaison, not just taking the word for it of, you know, most of these crews are fantastic, but Washington Filmworks can help you vet who you're talking to, make sure all the proper insurances are in place to avoid those kinds of mistakes of yesteryear.
Well, and I think employing the local folks or engaging with local folks or involving local folks, and even if it's a volunteer opportunity as an extra, you know, kids from the local school, you know, walking across the street, you know, to and fro, I think that would be a great way to win points with the local community and feel good about this. I assume that happens in your neck of the wood.
There are so many creative ways for local people to be involved, and it's really lovely to see when it's a production who's really open to that. And, you know, sometimes people are in a rush, just need to, you know, get it done and move on. But we've had some really fantastic productions that really want to engage with locals and have used local actors from the theater groups as their background extras, have hired local hair and makeup people. We're always trying to encourage crew who live locally to list themselves on the website and get involved on the crew directory there, because the great thing about these incentives and this program expanding at Washington Filmworks is we have a lot of creative people who live in these beautiful rural, you know, inspiring places, and it would be amazing if they're able to you know, not have to commute to LA to work on a project, maybe not even have to commute to Seattle to see more of these film activities going on in rural communities where a lot of creative technicians live.
Excellent. Well, I'll ask you one more question and then we'll turn it over to the audience, but you've given us some really good advice. Is there any additional advice, in your opinion, that people can do to support film and television production in their communities? I know that there's a dedicated webpage for film with your local DMO. What other tips and tricks would you give to other folks around the state?
First, definitely get your locations listed on Real Scout. That is a really promising gateway for all of the projects to come. And you know better than anybody what kind of unique places there are in your neck of the woods. And keep in mind too, they don't have to be what we would consider necessarily kind of the beautiful tourism asset. Sometimes a spooky old warehouse is exactly the kind of movie magic that somebody is looking for. So something that's unique and special to your area, whether it's sort of considered beautiful for a tourism pamphlet or not, can be perfect for film. So make sure that you're getting those locations up there. Speak to your local councils and agencies when you can. Just keep this front of mind, because often when these productions come to town, it's kind of a last minute panic. So the more we can learn from each one and prepare for the next one, the better. And it puts your best foot forward to bring higher quality, more professional productions your way. If they see, oh, you've done this before, I see you have a lot of locations, I see you have your film resources listed on the website, I see you have a film permit, they know what they're doing. And that's the kind of impression we want to give, not only to make it a smoother, easier process, but to, you know, avoid any miscommunication and snafus.
Well said, Laura. Okay, folks, we are at the time for audience questions. Dave, Amy, why don't you join us? Mike, are there any questions in the chat or in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first one, boy, I'm not sure, maybe for Amy or Dave. Can you talk about Love is Blind? How did they choose Seattle as a destination for that show? And maybe just kind of delve into how people choose destinations, period, I guess.
I don't know about Love. I can't answer that specifically, unfortunately, in terms of what their decision-making process was.
Well,
I mean,
say,
go ahead, Amy.
it's my understanding, and again, it's not something that Washington Filmworks funded, but King County just launched something called Harbor Island Studios, which is a converted flour mill. It's 177,000 square feet, I believe. There's photos of it on the location database if you're interested, and that is where they filmed, and it is largely almost free to film there. So I think that was what the poll was there, as well as I do believe that there was one of the contestants was local. I might be lying there, but go ahead, Dave. How else do they decide?
No, well, no, that's things like that, I think, are a big part of it. And when it comes to the larger projects, certainly the incentive program that Amy is talking about is the primary driver. You know, we like to think that everyone is going to come because Washington is the most beautiful state in the union, and that's a big part of the motivation, is the fantastic locations and other resources we have. But really the finances of all of it, and getting those discounts for the local dollars they spend, and comparing that to other states or other jurisdictions where they might do that's really the driver. And it's why we're so excited about the recent increase last year in the amount of money that's available through the fund. And that's the key driver for getting someone to decide to come to Washington as opposed to Oregon or British Columbia. Is a lot of that comes out of those incentives.
Hearing about all these great Washington films and shows, is there a complete list of Washington films on the Washington Film website and Filmworks website?
That's so interesting. We do not currently have that up, but it is something that we're in the process in our new Washington Filmworks 2.0, redesigning parts of our website, and that has been a very popular question. So not yet, but potentially in the future.
Sounds like maybe to come. Okay, and then when somebody asked, where is that magical waterfall that Amy mentioned earlier?
Oh, where is it? Dave, where is it?
I don't know which one you're talking about. That's
There's
tough
so
one.
many. There's so many.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You have to call me.
Yep, that's okay. And Paula wants to know, can I hear more about filming permits? She's familiar with getting permits in LA for specific productions, but is there an overall film permit that needs to happen too? That a place needs to have?
So I'll preface this conversation by saying it's different in every jurisdiction. What we can tell you is if you contact our office and Vicki specifically, we do have, a basic permit in our toolkit for you to look at. And then again, because, Vicki has been a location scout and producer for many, many years, she can help make sure that it is unique to your jurisdiction.
Great.
I also noticed that Chris Swenson from the city offered up his help. The city has a great permitting system in place as well.
Great. And maybe we can put Vicki's email in the chat just so people have that there.
I'd add too, just some notes. I mean, generally speaking about the permits what we're looking to get permission for ultimately through a permit is when it comes to those publicly managed spaces. So like I mentioned previously, we may be filming on private property, or where we're can do what we need to do without a lot of impact. But when we're extending our operations out onto public streets, public sidewalks, or city-owned or county-owned properties, that's where the permits really come into play, and being able to manage or work through those processes, what we're looking to do.
Yeah, so it's working with more than one jurisdiction necessarily in the particular location.
Yep. Yeah, it's almost.
Go ahead. Sorry. What were you going to say, Dave?
Oh, just that. Yeah, that it just has less to do often with the actual filming, or not. Doesn't always have to do with where we're pointing the camera. It has to do with how we're impacting the public and public-owned spaces.
Great. Brianna asks, Laura mentioned community engagement from productions. What are some examples of positive community engagement?
We've had some productions come before that when they found in certain areas we did not have a permit in place, the city kind of jumped to it and help them get it together. And so I always encourage them to have something in place just to cover your admin costs and if nothing else, and just prepared for that. But in this particular case, they didn't have a fee in place, and the production was so grateful to, the town for jumping together and pulling this off, that they did make sure to leave a donation with a local charity. And so, you can make productions aware of what kind of causes are in the area, who's going to be impacted by this, let them know of general relations like that. And like I said, be talking to your local theater groups, any kind of performer or crew member in the area. But it can be interesting stuff too. Like we've had people jump in and help with sourcing props. A few years ago, we were looking for a clawfoot tub for this shoot, and it was really fun to have people in the community jumping in and offering suggestions and the excitement of the idea that this is going to be on screen, and no matter where it's being seen, it's just a fun thing to be involved with.
That's my
come in and,
right
and
there.
buy up a restaurant for the day. It's like, well, we're shooting here, so we'll pay twice your Friday takings and things like that kind of leave the community happy, and then they get to see themselves on screen too, and that part is always fun and a good way to present yourself nationally and internationally.
Right. Well, I think that's the end of the questions, Matt, unless you have other questions.
Yeah, I just have one quick question, then we'll move to closing remarks. Amy, do you host any film-ready, film-friendly workshops across the state where you can kind of do a deeper dive of all of the things that we talked about today with a whole bunch of community stakeholders? Or do you do virtual presentations like this?
So we have a variety of different things up on our YouTube channel. And then in addition to that, we do have a quarterly gathering of our film liaisons that, we work with across the state to give them things that they need. It's that toolkit I talked about. What are the first 10 questions you should ask if approached by a Dave Drummond? What happens if, how do you notify the community? Like, we just give the tools that you need to succeed. And so that's an opportunity. And then again, we have so much new going on at Washington Filmworks that we are trying our best on socials and on our YouTube page, and then that quarterly to really work on being in community.
Excellent. Well, State of Washington Tourism has a program that works with local communities, rural communities, and does community workshops. It's the Rural Tourism Support Program. And if that community decides film and television production is something they want to focus in on, maybe there's room for collaboration between our two organizations.
Love that.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's our plug for our RTS program and for Washington Filmworks. Panelists, we're at the hour, so I think we can do quick closing comments, just last parting words of advice, encouragement before we sign off today. Amy, why don't we start with you?
Don't be afraid, jump in. It's fun. It's good for your economy. And I'll just mention that I will be at the tourism conference in Yakima. So don't be shy, come say hello, and I'd love to get to know you. Excellent,
thank you. Dave, what about you?
Yeah, just echo what Amy said, and that we're really excited about the rural incentives and this opportunity to take some of the film production work outside of the urban centers in ways that we haven't before. And so if that's you or if that's your community, we'd love to chat with you.
All right, thank you. And Laura, what's your parting words?
Just to not underestimate the real community pride that can come with hosting a production like this, and to remember that filmmakers are, kind of our ideal visitor in a way, that they want to come to a place, spend some time, spend some money, and celebrate what's here. They're not trying to change it or extract anything. Celebrate what's here and then go away again and bring it to the world. They're good tourism partners.
Well said. Well, thanks, panelists, and thank you, attendees, for joining this edition of the Tourism Skillshop in September. In October, we will not broadcast live. We'll be at the State Tourism Conference in Yakima, October 24th through the 26th, so we hope to see you there. And then we'll come back with a Tourism Skillshop in November, so stay tuned for that. And thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.